Hey everyone. Hello, it is Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout, and today I am treating you like grown-ups. Well, I try to every day, but specifically I'm going to be reading you this document that was handed to me last Tuesday, June 11th, in the Royal Courts of Justice in London, to which I had flown to appear as an interested witness. That's a formal designation in the very, very important, internationally important, though certainly critically important in the UK, hearing, a judicial review, which is the king on the application of Mark Steyn and Office of Communications, or OfCom, and GB News Limited and Naomi Wolf, interested parties. So what is this case? Sorry, just gonna get a little more comfortable. This case is so important. Basically, in October of 2022, I appeared on Mark Steyn's then show on GB News as a guest, and at his request, I presented material I've been presenting now for 2.5 years, nearly 3 years, the findings of the War Room Daily Clout Pfizer documents research volunteers, who, of course, as you all should know by now, have been reviewing the 450,000 documents released under court order following a successful lawsuit by attorney Aaron Siri against the FDA, the US FDA, that during which the FDA asked the court to keep the documents hidden for 75 years. Now we know why. Can everyone hear me okay at this distance from the mic? Let me know if not. And we've issued 104 reports. And these are 3,250 doctors, scientists, cardiologists, radiologists, oncologists, biostatisticians, medical fraud investigators, research scientists, biostatisticians, former CDC officials, former members of the intelligence community, on and on and on, former military. And the findings are devastating. You probably know by now, I hope you do, because I've been moving heaven and earth to tell you for the last 2.5 years, and so has the amazing Amy Kelly, who oversaw that undertaking, that project, which is ongoing. And by the way, this is not the place to go into it. I'll read you my actual statement in another episode, but the Pfizer documents findings have been presented by these volunteers at those bodies' requests twice to the Australian Parliament. Indeed, as I speak, Dr. Jayanti Kunadasan is currently presenting to the Australian Parliament, to the Parliament of Brazil, to the government of Japan, forthcoming, to the staff of Senator Ron Johnson, to the staff of Thomas Massey, Congressman Thomas Massey, to state assembly members, and on and on and on, universities, medical groups, hospital administrators. They published in a peer-reviewed journal their findings. They've published 2 books. One was a top 10 Amazon bestseller, and the second one is coming out actually in September, published by one of the most important imprints in America, which is Simon & Schuster. So the case I made in my filing to the court is that OfCom is trying to suppress information that the rest of the world, in free societies, and even many citizens in the UK already know is both important and factual. So, and then the last thing I want to say before I dive in is that within 1 week after my appearing in the Royal Courts of Justice, of course, there was almost no media there. Hearts of Oak, an independent podcaster, was there, thank heavens, and an observer, a journalist from the Press Association. I don't think his article has come out yet. But within a week after the court hearing, the judicial review, Naomi Klein, the formerly impressive public intellectual who wrote a whole book smearing me, basically, got a major award that had never been awarded for nonfiction before in Britain. And also just today, the British Medical Journal, which has been completely in the pocket of COVID Inc. and Vaccines Inc., ran a multi-study survey today, literally today, about damage to menstrual health, which was the tweet that got me deplatformed by the White House in 2021. And it was one of the things I brought up and discussed at length on Mark Steyn's show. So, you can see the British government kind of rearranging reality to suit a narrative of, we already knew this, or, you're a crazy person, but our doctors have it handled. I don't actually exactly get their press strategy, because on the one hand, they continue to non-person me and to smear me in Britain. The BBC, continually. I have my own stalker, actually, Dr. Matthew Sweet of the BBC, which was kind of scary, who's been on me since 2019 to smear me and attack me, often falsely, with false accusations. He physically showed up outside the courthouse, according to one witness. I didn't see him. I don't know if I would have recognized him, but another member of the Mark Steyn contingent saw him. And honestly, I think that's threatening and creepy. But having the British Medical Journal trot out this giant pronouncement that they're all over it, I'm not sure exactly what the play is there. Bottom line is, Mrs. Justice Farby, which is how I learned you're supposed to address the judge in Britain, also as Milady, which I absolutely love. I said, Your Honor, and was corrected. It's really beautiful. Like, justice is beautiful. When it works, it's beautiful. And part of why this whole thing is so painful is that I love Britain, right? I was a graduate student in Britain. I lived in Britain for years. I love Britain. And one big reason I have always loved Britain is their tradition of freedom, free speech, and rule of law, and also justice. I mean, they invented the Magna Carta, they invented press freedom. And so it's excruciating to see the liberties of the United Kingdom be hollowed out. And this OfCom's role as a broadcast media regulator, meaning censor, is a big part of that. And the 2003 statute that I gather gave OfCom the unbelievably sweeping powers that it has is also a big part of that. So let me go ahead and read this. And I know that it's a little weird to read a legal paper, but I feel like I've been training my audiences for a number of years now, because of BillCam, where we share legislation, to read and understand legal papers, which I think is really important for non-lawyers to be able to do, just as being able to dive in and get the gist of a scientific paper is also really, really important for non-scientists to be able to do. And I want to help in any way I can with that. All right. So this is called a skeleton argument. Here you have the Mark Steyn's lawyers' skeleton argument. That was the first half of the day in the morning, and it basically sets out the kind of summary of what their arguments are on each side. And so I'm not going to read you Mark Steyn's lawyers' argument. I can put it online if possible, because you can imagine it's basically people should be able to say things. But the opposition is very interesting. You can hear how truly unhinged OfCom's response is. Summary. The claimant, Mark Steyn, seeks judicial review of two decisions in which the defendant, OfCom, found that the first interested party, and that's GB News, had breached the broadcasting code, and that's going to be called the code. Both decisions concerned episodes of Mark Steyn, which were broadcast in 2022 on GB News, a broadcast service of which GBN is the licensee. Mark Steyn was a program broadcast 4 days a week in which the claimant, that's Mark Steyn, gave his view on various news stories and discussed these with guests. By its decision dated 6 March 2023, OfCom found that certain statements made by the claimant during an episode of Mark Steyn broadcast on 21st April 2020 2, and this is going to be called the first program because this case is about 2 programs. I'm in one and I'm not in the other. Statistics are in the other. Concerning the conclusions that could be drawn from statistical data on rates of COVID infection, hospitalization, and death were materially misleading, such as to cause potential harm in breach of Code Rule 2.2. So just narrating a bit, this is the essence, the nugget of what's at stake here, what's at issue. OfCom's brief, which they are going to explain, is that it's their job to make sure that harm does not befall the viewing British public. Well, here we are in 1984, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orwell land. What is harm? And what you will see is that harm is defined so, like, broadly isn't even the word. It's literally not defined, right? So harm is, and this is right out of Alice in Wonderland, harm is whatever OfCom says harm is. And I don't need to spell out for you how that is literally a recipe for totalitarianism. By its decision dated 9th May 2023, and together with the first decision, OfCom found that a number of claims concerning the effects of the mRNA vaccine, which were made in the course of an interview with Dr. Naomi Wolf, the second interested party, during an episode of Mark Steyn broadcast on 4th of October 2022, and this is where I come in, had the potential to impact, I won't even address the fact that they're using a noun as a verb, on viewers' decisions about their health and were potentially harmful, and that GBN had failed to provide viewers with adequate protection from this potential harm in breach of Code Rule 2.1. So that's the gist of their problem with me and what I said, all of which was entirely factual and a matter of public importance. The damage that was in the Pfizer documents, primary documents, not my opinion, not even my work, right? Telling the truth about that, presenting those facts is, according to OfCom, causing harm because it had the potential to impact on viewers' decisions about their health. And what GB News did wrong, according to OfCom, was that GB News had failed to provide viewers with adequate protection from this potential harm. So just imagine, think about what kind of world OfCom is positing there. A network broadcaster's mission is not to be accurate or not to defame people or to bring issues of public importance to the viewing public. No, the job of a network is to provide protection. What is that? Undefined. To viewers, to protect them from the harm of truth. That's OfCom's argument. That is literally through the mirror, through the looking glass, upside down, clown world logic. But OfCom is plowing ahead. They're spelling it out. It's like, GB News, you should have protected them from the truth bullets that Naomi Wolf was firing because truth can harm people, and it's your job to protect people from the harm of the truth. Literally their logic. All right. OfCom imposed no sanction for either breach, but following the second decision, requested that GBN attend a meeting to discuss its compliance approach. And you can imagine how terrifying those kinds of summonses are to news stations. The claimant's claims, that's Mark Steyn's, in respect to the first decision and second decision were issued as separate proceedings, but have been directed to be heard together in light of the overlapping issues. The claimant seeks judicial review on the following grounds, with permission of Lavender J., I think that's the former judge, I'm not sure, granted on 22nd December 2023. So what is judicial review? It means that the judge, this very thoughtful seeming Mrs. Judge Farby, is tasked with reviewing the decision, seeing if the last decision was decided correctly according to the law. And the judicial review will be finding out that both decisions were implicitly premised on material and or unsustainable factual findings as to the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine, and that OfCom's finding of breach in respect to each decision constituted a disproportionate interference with the claimant's right to freedom of expression under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So again, very important. Everyone in Britain who's watching, if you can watch, which I hope you can, that is your right. Your rights to free expression and without disproportionate interference are guaranteed by Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So those are your rights. They're not as good as the First Amendment, but they're better than this. And you need to go read that Article 10 of the ECHR, print it out, distribute it, because don't be gaslit. You still have rights to free expression in spite of what OfCom is trying to say. So permission on 3 other grounds in the first claim and 2 other grounds in the second claim was refused. On 23rd January 2024, more than 4 weeks after the date of Lavender J's order, the claimant, Mark Steyn, filed a notice of renewal seeking permission to renew his application in relation to ground 2 of the first claim, under which he contends the OfCom was wrong in construing the claimant's observations as representations of fact when they were merely expressions of opinion. The claimant seeks relief from sanction in relation to the delay. So what Mark Steyn's lawyers are forced to argue is that OfCom shouldn't be sanctioning Mark Steyn because Mark Steyn, in interpreting the statistical data, which is what he got in trouble for with the first program that OfCom slapped him around for, he's forced to say, well, I was just expressing an opinion. I was not stating that these were facts. Now, I personally think he has a right to say that they were facts, but this is the way the law is tortuously construed in Britain. For reasons set out below, OfCom invites the court to dismiss the claims. OfCom is saying, don't even listen to this, make this go away. In summary, neither decision rested on any material and or unsustainable findings of fact. So this is another, we are through the looking glass moment. OfCom is saying, let our tyranny stand, Mrs. Justice Farby, because we're not even saying facts matter, right? We're not even saying that something needs to be false in order to get Mark Steyn in trouble. That's literally their argument here. OfCom did not and was not required itself to make evidenced findings regarding the safety or efficacy of the COVID-19 booster vaccine in order to conclude, for the reasons that it did, that content in the first and second programs was potentially harmful to viewers. Do you understand what I just read to you? Do you understand? Britain, listen, they're saying that booster could be harmful. That booster could kill you. It's not our job to say that Mark Steyn was wrong in raising concerns about the booster or that Naomi was wrong. No, they could be totally right. We are not even obligated to make evidenced findings regarding the safety or efficacy of the booster. That's what they're saying. We just have to say it's not okay for you to talk about it that way. Like literally, facts don't matter. They're saying again, the decisions did not, in all the circumstances, constitute a disproportionate interference with the claimant's right under Article 10. Of course, they would argue that. And if relief from sanction is granted in relation to the delayed renewal application, permission on ground 2 of the first claim should in any event be refused for the reasons given by Lavender J and set out below. The regulatory regime. So here, what OfCom is about to do is explain why the law gives them the power to do whatever they want, even if issues that are being presented are true and factual and a matter of public importance. OfCom's functions are conferred by the Communications Act 2003. OfCom's general duties are set out in Section 3 of the 2003 Act. They include duties: A, to secure the application of standards, quote, that provide adequate protection to members of the public from the inclusion of offensive and harmful material in television services. So true information about harms from the vaccine is being lumped under this sentence. offensive and harmful material. It doesn't matter that it's true. B, to have regard in performing its duties to the need to apply those standards, quote, in the manner that best guarantees an appropriate level of freedom of expression. And then they cite where you find that. So they're saying the way they did this, which now means Mark Steyn's career is over and my reputation is trashed thoroughly and my career is over in the UK, is appropriate. It's proportionate. C, to have regard in all cases to, quote, the principles under which regulatory activities should be transparent, accountable, proportionate, consistent, and targeted only at cases in which action is needed, end quote, and, quote, any other principles appearing to OfCom to represent the best regulatory practice, end quote. So basically, they're saying, the law says their activity has to be transparent, accountable, proportionate, consistent, and targeted only at cases in which action is needed. Again, factual information about a clear and present danger in experimental injection that most of the people of Britain were being forced to take or were taking or choosing to take, I should say, or being propagandized and pushed to take. So that's nonsense that was only a case in which action was needed. And the other thing I just want to say is transparent and accountable. Speaking for myself, I don't know who these people are. I literally don't know who these people are. Who at OfCom decided to tell every legacy news outlet in Britain that I am a conspiracy theorist? Who? I don't have that name. I can't check that person's CV. I can't challenge that person to a debate, to compare, to present my evidence and see where that person thinks the evidence is wrong. That person is utterly, or those people, not transparent to me, right? They called me a conspiracy theorist. What's their education, right? What's their career look like? Who are they? How credible are they? Are they a drug addict? I don't know. Do they have a string of shoplifting convictions? I don't know, right? Totally not transparent, totally not accountable. By S13 of the 2003 Act, OfCom is required to set and from time to time review and revise such standards for the content of programs to be included in television and radio services as appear to them best calculated to secure the standards objectives. These include the objective of securing that generally accepted standards are applied to the contents of television and radio services so as to provide adequate protection for members of the public from the inclusion in such services of offensive and harmful material. And again, they're reiterating that the truth, the facts that have been public now and published around the world for years without any question from Pfizer that they are accurate, there's Loki waking up, fall into the category of offensive and harmful materials. S3193 provides that the standards set by OfCom under 3191 must be contained in one or more codes. OfCom has accordingly published a code with which every broadcaster is required to comply as a condition of their license. These people's grammar is shocking. OfCom has explained that the code has been drafted in light of the Human Rights Act 1998 and the ECHR, though it contradicts these laws. In particular, the right to freedom of expression as expressed in Article 10, but it contradicts Article 10, as we've seen. OfCom's regulatory responsibilities under the 2003 Act include assessing, investigating, and determining whether licensed broadcasters have breached the code. Drum roll, ominous music. OfCom publishes a fortnightly broadcast and on-demand bulletin, which sets out details of any new investigations that have been commenced, any decisions on breach that OfCom has taken, and any complaints which have been assessed by OfCom but not pursued. And again, as someone who was smeared all over Britain by these people, I never got that notification that there was an investigation into what I said by OfCom, ever. I didn't get invited to respond. I didn't get shown the complaints. I didn't get invited to respond to the complaints. Nothing. Totally opaque. OfCom has set standards in Section 2 of the Code to achieve the objective of adequate protection from offensive and harmful material. It's going to get a little less dry soon. Bear with me. Rule 10.2.1 states that, quote, generally accepted standards must be applied to the content of television and radio services so as to provide adequate protection for members of the public from the inclusion in such services of harmful and/or offensive materials. So we've heard that before. Quote, factual programs or items or portrayals of factual matters must not materially mislead the audience. What I said is 1000% factually confirmed. And again, the British Medical Journal just came out today confirming the factuality, the factiness, the factitude of my facts. And as we'll see, poor Mark Steyn in his first program that was sanctioned was using government statistics. How much more factual facts can you get? OfCom has published guidance notes to assist broadcasters in complying with Section 2. In relation to Rule 2.1, the guidance notes state, we recognize that some programming may include material that has the potential to be harmful or offensive. This puts a responsibility on the broadcaster, i.e. the licensee, to take steps to provide adequate protection for the audience. End quote. Again, thank you guys in Britain. Is that what you want the job of a licensee, of someone with a broadcast license to be, to protect you from, harm as OfCom defines it, however they choose to define it? It's a very great burden. I'm speaking as a journalist and editor and running a news site myself. I don't know what on Daily Cloud is going to harm or offend someone. I mean, that someone will find harmfully offensive. I have a responsibility to make sure it's accurate and to correct it if it's not publicly, but I don't know what's going to offend you. It's an insane brief to assign to a broadcast network. The potential harm arising from claims or advice in relation to health or wealth is specifically addressed. And here's where I come in, and Mark Steyn's earlier program that got in trouble. Quote, in previous investigations under Rule 2.1, OfCom has identified claims or advice in programs about viewers' and listeners' health or wealth as being potentially harmful. Isn't that interesting that that's what they singled out? Not like, pornography or instructions about how to make a bomb. These have included, for example, statements that specific products, practices, or activities will result in various benefits to health or wealth. This kind of content has also sometimes been accompanied by dismissive or derogatory comments about more conventional treatments or advice. This sure sounds like guidance to protect hegemonies financially and medically. Health or wealth claims could be especially harmful to people who are vulnerable. For example, those who are suffering from serious medical conditions or are in serious financial difficulty who may be more susceptible to these messages. Programs including health or wealth claims and advice may be broadcast as long as broadcasters provide adequate protection, that word again, for viewers or listeners from any potentially harmful content. It's health or wealth, right? Like if you buy gold, the broadcaster can't assure you that gold will not go down in price someday. OfCom must seek an appropriate balance between ensuring members of the public are adequately protected from potentially harmful material and the broadcaster's and audience's right to freedom of expression as set out in Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, end quote. The guidance notes advise that there is a hierarchy of factors which affect the potential harm likely to be caused by health or wealth claims and identify a non-exhaustive list of considerations. Thank you, OfCom. Primary factors are A, the severity of the situation under discussion on the basis that, quote, there is a higher level of potential harm where claims are made about the most serious medical conditions, end quote. So you can't have a program, or you have more risk commissioning as a broadcaster a program about tuberculosis or AIDS than about bad breath, right? Like literally that's how absurd this guidance is. B, the degree to which the claims are targeted at vulnerable people. As the guidance notes emphasize, quote, there is a greater risk of harm if vulnerable people, and that's in brackets, so we don't even know if it's in the statute, seem to be directly addressed, or if persuasive messages, especially relevant to them, are included in a program with either the intention or the likely effect that they will act on that advice. For example, by discontinuing existing medical treatment in favor of alternative treatments. There it is. OfCom is supposed to be a broadcast media regulator, but right there, what you have is a protection clause to make sure that British radio and television can never, ever, ever, ever cover alternative treatments. They cannot go outside of allopathic medicine at risk of losing their broadcast licenses. That's why you're never going to have a feature on, turmeric and anti-inflammatory conditions, or vitamin D and cancer, because OfCom will make life hell for the broadcaster if you dare to stray into alternative treatments. They literally say that. So is this freedom of expression, or is this already a set of guidelines that, under the banner or cosmetic aegis, Loki's just settling in there, I hope that's okay with you, of protecting you from harm, they're actually telling broadcasters exactly what they can never touch. Never touch gold, right? Don't do it. Never touch Bitcoin, right? Never touch vitamin D. I mean, there's a whole world of things that if you're a licensee, you are not going to cover because of these sentences. The authority of the speaker making the claims. Now, this gets more Alice in Wonderland-y. The guidance notes emphasize that, quote, if potentially harmful claims about health and wealth are made by a speaker who is perceived by the audience as having authority, then there is more chance of them treating those claims as credible and making decisions based on them. The kinds of figures who might possess such authority will depend on the context, but could include a well-known or popular presenter, a religious preacher, a community leader, or anyone presented as an expert, end quote. Surreal. And you'll hear what got me in trouble, or what got poor Mark Steyn in trouble for having me on his show. I was too authoritative. I presented in too authoritative a manner. If I had been wearing a clown wig and a red nose and singing to a musical accompaniment, the Pfizer documents findings, he would not have been ensnared by this insane paragraph. Insane paragraph. You're in more trouble if the person you have on is more authoritative or is perceived as an authority figure. Literally, that's the case. So it's fine to have people talking about vitamin D if they're strung out drug addicts in some lunatic asylum, right? But God forbid you have a Yale graduate, Oxford graduate, Rhodes Scholar, former advisor to president and vice president, et cetera, 8-time internationally best-selling author, wearing a black jacket, talking soberly about primary source documentation. That's what, if it's authoritative, you're in trouble. That is literally an insane directive to a broadcaster. And just, if you're in Britain, I want you to imagine what it's like being a licensee trying to follow these guidelines, right? It's like walking through a minefield where something's bound to explode unless you give the British public nonsense day after day after day. Secondary factors which the guidance notes identify as increasing the risk of harm include the absence in a program of a range of alternative views or opinions about contentious health or wealth issues. So if you've got someone talking about the imminent collapse of the economy, you have to have someone on saying that the economy is not going to collapse. Or if you have someone like me bringing forth a great deal of evidence of the harms of the Pfizer documents, you have to have someone on the same show saying that the Pfizer injection is fine. And again, this is impossible to meet because, as Mark Steyn's lawyer pointed out, Mark Steyn pointed out, Mark Steyn's producer pointed out, they kept trying to get various government figures to come on the show and say that, and they wouldn't do so. And now you know why they wouldn't do so, because the whole edifice of lies is coming unraveled. But also, again, impossible to meet this guidance note. C, the particular circumstances of individual audience members, an issue which the guidance notes emphasize may not be obvious and which is of particular concern in relation to health-related claims because, quote, Viewers or listeners may have different levels of vulnerability for a variety of reasons, including their age and individual medical history, which is likely to affect how potentially harmful the content is for them, end quote. Just note, everyone, what has happened to Britain. Look at how OfCom has arrogated to itself the role of reading your mind and inferring the invisible potentiality of your medical history sitting in the audience, and making sure that they know better than you do what you can handle. So condescending, right? Like someone in a wheelchair can't make his or her own decision. Someone who has, stage 4 cancer can't make his or her own decision. No, OfCom, who, by the way, are not doctors, not scientists. I literally don't know what they are, right? I don't know what their credentials are. They are the ones to make the decision for you. I just really want everyone in Europe to think, to understand the philosophical matrix that underlies this paragraph. It is not freedom. It is not you are an adult with rights who can think for yourself and decide for yourself and are entitled to free speech. It is literally unseen people saying, oh, someone in the audience may be vulnerable in ways we can't even imagine. And we have to muzzle information that may come their way because they're pathetic, really is what OfCom is saying here. It's so condescending and insulting. In relation to Rule 2.2, the guidance notes state as follows, quote, although it is a fundamental requirement of broadcasting that an audience should not be misled in the portrayal of factual matters, OfCom only regulates the accuracy of programs per se in news programs. Nevertheless, OfCom is required to guard against harmful or offensive material, and it is possible that actual or potential harm and or offense may be the result of misleading material in relation to the representation of factual issues. This rule is therefore designed to deal with content that materially misleads the audience so as to cause harm or offense. Now, when you get into language that convoluted, it means someone is lying, right? Because it is very hard to even understand what OfCom is trying to say there. Either that someone's lying or that they're trying to put nonsense across as sense. I think, well, let's read the rest of it. I think what this is setting up is a news program has to be factual, but a non-news program doesn't have to not be factual to cause offense, right? And be naughty and scoldable and sanctionable by OfCom. It is not designed to deal with issues of inaccuracy in non-news programs, and complaints that relate solely to inaccuracy rather than with harm and offense will not be entertained. Whether a program or item is, quote, materially, end quote, misleading depends on a number of factors, such as the context, the editorial approach taken in the program, the nature of the misleading material, and above all, either what the potential effect could be or what actual harm or offense has occurred, end quote. Again, I will note everything I said was true, and the previous show, everything Mark Steyn was saying was based on government statistics. The claimant does not challenge the lawfulness of the requirements of the 2003 Act, the Code, or the guidance. 3, the decisions. Now we get into the meat of it. The first decision. The episode of Mark Steyn, broadcast on 21st April 2022, began with a monologue by the claimant, which addressed the UK government's rollout of COVID-19 vaccines, particularly the third booster dose, and analyzed official data published by the UK Health Security Agency. The material parts of the claimant's monologue are transcribed in the first decision and are not repeated here. The relevant segments can be found at timestamps, etc., of the first program, should the court wish to watch them. And it's a little scary that the assumption isn't that the court has already watched them, but, OfCom is helpfully providing the timestamps. OfCom received 4 complaints about the broadcast. 4 in a country of 30 million people. I think it's 30 million, maybe more. Having followed its procedures for investigating breaches of content standards for television and radio. OfCom published the first decision on 6 March 2023. In summary, OfCom concluded that A, the claimant had made certain representations in the first program about factual matters, namely that the health outcomes in the groups of people who had and had not received the third dose could be directly compared for the purpose of drawing conclusions about its efficacy and effects, and that the UK HSA data demonstrated that the third dose caused increased levels of infection, hospitalization, and death. This is government data. These representations were materially misleading, even though they were true. OfCom took into account the fact that the claimant had not referred to the express warning included in the UK HSA statistical reports from which he was quoting that, quote, this raw data should not be used to estimate vaccine effectiveness, end quote, and that the comparison undertaken by the claimant had disregarded inherent biases between the two groups. So what am I doing here? I'm pointing out that OfCom are not scientists. They're not statisticians. They're not epidemiologists. They're not virologists. They're not any of those things. But what they're doing in scolding Mark Steyn in the first program is finding fault with his statistical methodology, which is not part of their brief. It's not part of their brief. A number of contextual factors raised by GBN, including the nature of the program and the nature of the presenter, meaning that its opinion, did not negate these concerns. OfCom rejected the suggestion that claimant's representations had been presented as a possible interpretation or his personal opinion. And if you watch his show, that show, it's clearly an interpretation. He's interpreting. He's a commentator. He's an opinion journalist. If you go to Mark Steyn online, you will see opinion. Everything he is opinion. It is Mark Steyn's opinion. So he's taking this government data. He didn't read the nonsensical government warning that this set of data sets should not be used to draw any conclusions whatsoever about the safety and efficacy of the vaccine, even though more vaccinated people were getting sick and dying than unvaccinated, which our data also confirm and many studies now confirm, right? But you're not allowed to, he had to trot out that caveat, which wasn't spelled out as something you have to trot out in order to not get scolded, punished, spanked, deplatformed, smeared by OfCom. Impossible, yet again, to comply with. The representations caused potential harm to viewers, in particular because they could have resulted in viewers making important decisions about their health while the vaccine rollout was ongoing, based on misleading information and because they had the potential to cause significant concern and alarm among viewers who had already received a booster vaccine. So Mark Steyn is using government data to show that you are in more danger the more vaccines you take, more likely to be in the dead category or the very sick category. And he's not supposed to tell the British public that because it will upset them if they've already taken a booster dose. But OfCom ignores the fact that it could protect their health in that it might lead them to not take a fourth dose. Because our data also confirm that Pfizer knew that the vaccines didn't stop COVID and that Pfizer had to hide 8 deaths of infected vaccinated people in order to claim that the vaccine was more effective than not getting vaccinated. In other words, if they had not hidden 8 dead people, they would have had to conclude what UK government data also shows, which is you're more likely to be in the dead category if you're vaccinated. But no, you might alarm people if you tell them they might be more likely to be dead according to Pfizer data and UK statistical data. OfCom took careful account in reaching these conclusions of the representations made by GBN and of Article 10. Sure you did. OfCom found that the first program had breached Rule 2.2. However, OfCom did not find the breach to be sufficiently serious, deliberate, repeated, and or reckless to warrant the imposition of a statutory sanction. So that was fine. However, here comes me. The second decision. That was fine in the sense that OfCom decided not to fine or do other horrible things to Mark Steyn and GB News because of that show. The second decision, the episode of Mark Steyn broadcast on 4th October 2022 contains an interview with the author and journalist Naomi Wolf. The interview was trailed by the claimant earlier in the second program as a discussion, quote, on an ever more horrifying public scandal, end quote. The material parts of the interview are transcribed in the second decision, and the relevant segment can be found at the timestamp, and they give the timestamps should the court wish to watch it. By way of illustration, the interview included the following and other similar statements from Naomi Wolf about the COVID-19 vaccination program. Quote, it was the doctors in pre-Nazi Germany in the early 30s who were co-opted by the National Socialists and sent to do exactly what we're seeing kind of replaying now, end quote. Literally correct. I refer you to two important books, Racial Hygiene and The Nazi Doctors. Quote, we're seeing wholesale purchasing of the medical establishment in the United States, in Britain, and in countries around the world, end quote. True. In Britain, as I understand, recently it's been fully documented that the spokesmodels pushing the vaccine were receiving thousands and thousands of pounds for doing so. Quote, I believe these, brackets, the mRNA vaccines, in brackets, are bioweapons because they are literally sterilizing people, end quote. True. They left out the context that China had manufactured Pfizer injection and that the adverse events were manifesting an order of political importance of the countries where they were rolling out. And they were sterilizing people, and they are sterilizing people, as the British Medical Journal just reported today. Because when you have ruined menstrual cycles, you have lower fertility, and other reasons that I gave on the Mark Steyn show. Quote, a mass murder has taken place, end quote. True. There were 1,220 deaths in the Pfizer documents in 3 months, many of them immediately following the injection. And in two of our reports, the stroke report and the liver report, half of the adverse events were within 48 hours after the injection, including deaths. There are 2 dead babies that died due to, quote, maternal exposure to the vaccine, and that's Pfizer's words. And there's a baby that died in convulsions from nursing from a vaccinated mom. And Pfizer knew that the milk of moms was being poisoned and that babies were dying as a result and getting very sick. They have a chart of sick babies. They have a chart of ruined menstrual cycles. So I was not using rhetoric there. I was using Britannica's definition of mass murder, more than several deaths or murders at different locations. And Pfizer had different sites where they were rolling out these injections, and they were keeping track of these deaths. And I'll add the 8 deaths that they didn't report in vaccinated dead people. I don't know if those could be called murders till we have more information, but it was unlawful for them to hide those deaths. So literally a mass murder has taken place. Quote, this is a massive crime, end quote. True. Quote, they want to sweep it under the rug because mass murder has not just taken place, it is still taking place, disabling people into the future, sterilizing the next generation. That's correct. In fact, 13 to 20% drop in live births in Western European countries and North American countries. Quote, I have 3,500 experts at the War Room Daily Cloud, Pfizer documents, research volunteer effort, medical experts, scientific experts, going through the Pfizer documents, and indeed they're finding horrific harms against human reproduction, 360-degree harm, end quote. That's just correct. These are just factual statements that I made. And if anyone doubts them, the documents that back up these statements, including linking to the Pfizer documents, are there for free on the upper right-hand corner of Daily Clout as I speak. And anyone in Britain can see, OfCom can see that all of these are facts. The claimant concluded the interview by referring to the COVID vaccination program as, quote, the biggest public scandal this century, end quote. He continued, quote, if Western governments knew about the damage right at the beginning, right in those first weeks, and they're still insisting right now that everybody get their 3rd booster shot, end quote. I mean, fact. This is a fact. That was Mark Steyn speaking. Factual. OfCom received 422 complaints about the second program. And again, we don't know, are these trolls, bots, AstroTurf, real people? We don't know. OfCom followed its procedures and published the second decision on 9th May 2023, finding the second program to be in breach of Rule 2.1 of the code. In brief summary, OfCom acknowledged that at the time of the broadcast, public policy relating to the virus was not impacting people's lives in the same way as at the start of the pandemic. It took into account the fact that the World Health Organization had recently declared that the end of the COVID-19 pandemic was, quote, in sight. B, however, while OfCom accepted that there was limited publicity in the UK at the time of the broadcast to encourage widespread vaccination among the general population, it observed that there remained a targeted autumn booster rollout aimed at certain people, including those aged 50 years or over and people with other health vulnerabilities who might be at greater risk from a severe outcome from the virus. Not true. Turns out that you're at more risk if you have the vaccine. For these more vulnerable individuals in particular, the decision as to whether or not to take up a vaccine might carry significant health implications. It was therefore vital that they were able to make properly informed choices based on appropriately presented and contextualized information. And remember, government officials would not come on Mark Steyn's show to rebut him or to rebut me or to rebut their own statistics. OfCom acknowledged the importance of broadcasters discussing and debating policies relating to COVID-19, including the side effects of vaccines and matters relating to their efficacy. It noted, however, that Naomi Wolf's comments included serious claims that the vaccination rollout represented premeditated, quote, mass murder, end quote, and that it had disabled and sterilized people. In OfCom's view, these claims were not simply presented as, quote, expressions of concern and warning, end quote, but amounted to the promotion, and this is where they get straight up defamatory, the promotion of a serious, unchallenged conspiracy theory by an interviewee who had been presented to the audience as having particular knowledge and expertise in the safety of the vaccines in question, parentheses, thereby lending credence and authority to her claims, end parentheses. So this is a government agency with the gigantic megaphone of the British government telling the world and Britain and the court that what I had to say was a conspiracy theory, a serious, unchallenged conspiracy theory. I'm a journalist of 40 years. I've published in every major news outlet. I've been a columnist in 4 major, British publications and global publications. And OfCom is just saying I am a serious, unchallenged conspiracy theory monger. OfCom considered that the broadcast of these claims by such an individual had the potential to impact on viewers' decisions about their health, including important health decisions affecting those with health vulnerabilities, and concluded that the claims were therefore potentially harmful, and it was incumbent on GBN when broadcasting such content to include adequate protection for viewers. OfCom concluded that in this instance, adequate protection for viewers was lacking. In particular, the second program lacked any opposing views and may I note, the whole rest of the media universe at that time was an opposing view, and made no attempt to contextualize Naomi Wolf's claims. The context was all pinned for free on my website, a fact which would have further reinforced her authority in the eyes of viewers. So again, OfCom's saying Mark Steyn's crime was that I presented and was presented authoritatively as an authority. Instead, she was allowed to present her allegations without material challenge, with the claimant himself appearing positively to support and endorse many of her comments. And again, what I was presenting was not my point of view. It was not my opinion. It was fact, and it was as I've walked you through, every single summary I made is based on the Britannica definition. OfCom took particular account of GBN's stated goal of, quote, airing a wider range of views, end quote, on its service, and its argument that the claims, quote, were Naomi Wolf's opinion, nothing more, nothing less, end quote. However, OfCom pointed out that defining content as opinion does not remove the requirement, under the code for the broadcaster to ensure that viewers are adequately protected from potentially harmful material. Again, this notion that facts are harmful. Moreover, Naomi Wolf had been presented as a figure of authority on vaccine safety, and accordingly, her opinions would likely have carried weight with the audience. Again, if I had been presented in a nonsensical light, all would be well, and Mark Steyn would still have his show. Taking account of all of these factors, OfCom concluded that GBN had not provided adequate protection for viewers from the inclusion of potentially harmful material and was therefore in breach of Rule 2.1. OfCom asked GBN to attend a meeting to discuss its compliance with the code, but imposed no statutory sanction. Submissions in response to the claimant's grounds: by material and or unsustainable finding of fact regarding the potential for harm. By ground 3 of the first claim and ground 2 of the second claim, the claimant contends that OfCom's assessment of the potential for harm in each of the decisions was based on an unsustainable material finding of fact, namely A, in the case of the first decision, that the third COVID-19 vaccine was effective, and B, in the case of the second decision, that the third COVID-19 vaccine was safe and effective. In other words, Mark Steyn is saying that OfCom's prior decision was based on 2 faulty premises and that everything was fine with the vaccine. The claimant's argument is understood to proceed as follows. A, OfCom's decisions contain no finding that the vaccine was safe and effective. So basically, they're summarizing Mark Steyn's perspective here. Nor did OfCom adduce evidence to show that the vaccine was safe and effective. Failure to take an ineffective and/or unsafe medicine cannot be harmful. I love Mark Steyn. I can hear his voice here, right? It's like, this is upside down world. Therefore, without such evidenced findings, OfCom's conclusion of potential harm was unsustainable. Did you follow all of that? I hope you did. Failure to take an ineffective and/or unsafe medicine cannot be harmful, says Mark Steyn and his set of lawyers. Okay. The claimant's position, in other words, is that notwithstanding the undisputed seriousness of the health condition in question, the vulnerability of certain sectors of the population, and the fact that the vaccine was being widely recommended by health authorities around the world, particularly for vulnerable cohorts, OfCom was not entitled to find that statements casting doubt on the efficacy and safety of the vaccine in emphatic and alarming terms, that's me, were even potentially harmful without itself addressing the questions of vaccine efficacy and safety, making findings on those questions and supporting those findings with evidence. So what Mark Steyn is saying is OfCom doesn't have the evidence to say that what we were doing was harmful. And now you're about to hear OfCom saying, we don't need to provide the evidence that the vaccines are safe and effective in order to say that calling them into question is harmful. OfCom submits that that is incorrect for the following reasons. And this is where I hope you're sitting down. OfCom is the broadcast regulator. It is charged, I wish I could do this in a British accent actually. It is charged with devising and enforcing rules to provide adequate protection for members of the public from potentially harmful material in broadcast television and radio programs. It has very considerable expertise and experience in evaluating such material by reference to the standard. OfCom is not a health authority. It is not in a position to make evidence findings about the truth or falsity of claims or advice in relation to controversial health-related questions that may be complex and technical matters of expertise. So OfCom is saying, I am harmful for presenting health-related information, but they are not harmful for saying I'm harmful and sanctioning GB News because they don't need to know anything about whether or not the vaccine is harmful. OfCom does not need to make findings of that sort in order reasonably to conclude that content encouraging or discouraging a certain sort of treatment for or against a serious health condition may be potentially harmful. Where such encouragement or discouragement runs contrary to established medical advice on which there is broad consensus, which, by the way, by now there isn't. A, and B, think about that. It means you in Britain will never get programming that runs in any way counter to what the medical consensus, meaning pharma consensus, allopathic medicine consensus, NHS stakeholders consensus, vaccine investors consensus. Nothing that runs counter to that can be broadcast according to this definition. Broad consensus, for instance, and or is based on a misleading presentation of evidence. OfCom may reasonably conclude that there is potential harm and that some viewer protection in the form of challenge, contextualization, or appropriate presentation is required without itself assessing the efficacy or safety of the treatment in question. The broadcast of such content in such a context without appropriate challenge, contextualization, or presentation may prevent viewers from making properly informed choices about their health in circumstances where the stakes are high. And again, this wasn't my research. I was presenting scientists' research. There was broad consensus among those scientists that Their summaries about the material and the Pfizer documents were correct. You can see the Pfizer documents linked in their reports. And also the whole rest of the media was a counter argument. And as I will keep pointing out, the producers tried to get people from the government to say Naomi's wrong, and they wouldn't come on the show, or to say, in fact, Mark Steyn, you're misrepresenting the data, but they wouldn't come on the show. In the present case, OfCom did not purport and was not required to make evidenced findings itself concerning the safety or efficacy of the COVID vaccine in order reasonably to conclude that content in the first and second programs was potentially harmful. The context included the undisputed facts that COVID is a potentially serious condition with which governments were grappling in the context of a global pandemic, and that the vaccine continued to be recommended by health authorities around the world, particularly for the vulnerable. I'll just note that Britain withdrew the AstraZeneca vaccine in May of this year. So this is no longer even true in Britain. Against that background, OfCom concluded in relation to the first program that the claimant's misleading statements, including that official statistics demonstrated that the third booster shot made it more likely that you would get COVID, be hospitalized, and die, were potentially harmful because viewers might be prevented by these misleading claims, although they were accurate from the data, from making properly informed choices about vaccination. And those who had already received the booster shot might experience significant concern and alarm. Contrary to the claimant's case, these conclusions did not require OfCom itself to make an evidence finding that the vaccine was effective. 2, OfCom concluded in relation to the second program that Naomi Wolf's claims that the vaccination rollout program represented premeditated, quote, mass murder, and that it had disabled and sterilized people were potentially harmful because they, quote, had the potential to impact on viewers' decisions about their health, end quote, in circumstances where those decisions, quote, might carry significant health implications, end quote, particularly for those with health vulnerabilities, and where it therefore remained, quote, vital, end quote, that viewers, quote, were able to make properly informed choices. Contrary to the claimant's case, these conclusions do not rely on an implicit, unsupported finding by OfCom that Naomi Wolf's claims are wrong. They rely only on the proposition that they may be wrong. They are not uncontrovertibly correct, in which circumstances, given their persuasive force and the potential implications for the health decisions of those with health vulnerabilities, they are potentially harmful if not adequately challenged and contextualized. It is relevant in that regard that GBN's own representations themselves acknowledge that, quote, much of this evidence, e.g. the Pfizer papers, bracket, on which Naomi Wolf relied, end bracket, is strongly disputed as to its correct interpretation, end quote. GBN, that's not true. And you shouldn't have said that. That's like literally defamatory. You shouldn't have said that without bringing that to me. It's not true. It's been 3 years now, and we haven't had a lawyer's letter. No one has challenged. You know, there was one challenge. We had undercounted dead babies rather than counting them correctly. The correct number was twice the count of dead babies. That is not correct. Our findings are not in dispute. Governments around the world, parliaments around the world are soliciting the presentation of our findings. The claimant suggests that OfCom has, in its analysis, wrongly conflated the questions whether content in the first and second programs was potentially harmful and whether there was adequate protection from that harm. OfCom disagrees. And by the way, in the previous paragraph was where the lawyer for OfCom said to the judge said something like, can something be a conspiracy theory if it's true? Or she may have said, can something be harmful if it's true? And OfCom's attorney said, something can be a conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories can be true. And the court erupted in laughter. And the judge properly said, if the audience didn't control itself, she would clear the courtroom. But that was OfCom's position. Something can be true and still be a conspiracy theory. So they're not challenging the truth of what I presented. As regards the first decision, the claimant's submission at 29 is obscure. The first decision found a breach of Rule 2.2, not 2.1, which provides that factual programs or items or portrayals of factual matters must not materially mislead the audience. For the reasons set out in the first decision, OfCom concluded that the first program, let's see how many pages we have left to go. We have some left to go, so I may come to the end of this section and then pick up subsequently. Presented certain factual matters in a way that was materially misleading, such as to cause potential harm. As regards the second decision, the claimant's submission is incorrect. OfCom found that claims that were presented with authority by Naomi Wolf in the second program, which claims were indisputably polemical, alarming, and controversial. More defamation. Indisputably polemical, alarming, and controversial. I dispute that. They were not polemical. If they were alarming, it's because I was factually presenting alarming fact. And if they're controversial, it's because powerful people did this to the people of Britain and to the world. That's the controversy. Had the potential to impact on viewers' decisions about their health in circumstances where those decisions might carry significant health implications and were therefore potentially harmful. It was therefore incumbent on GBN as the licensee to provide adequate protection to its viewers. It went on to consider whether adequate protection had been provided in this case and concluded that it had not. In summary, OfCom's regulatory assessment of potential harm to broadcast audiences relied on no unsustainable factual assumptions and was cogent and reasonable. And there is no basis for the court to go behind it, meaning to find that it was wrongly concluded. And I'll stop there. There's more, which I may post. No, I'll read it in a subsequent live stream because it has a lot of interesting things to say about the limits to your freedom of expression, Britain, and that freedom of expression is not absolute. But there you have it. That's OfCom's. That's up to page 15 of an argument presentation that is 25 pages long. So we'll read 10 more pages at another live stream soon. And let me now take your questions and comments. I hope you, through the dense thicket of all of that legalese, understand how serious this is, what OfCom is claiming the right to do, and what this statute, which has to be repealed, the 2003 statute, has done to Britain, the home of freedom of speech. I will say it over and over. OfCom claims the right to say that anything it says is harm or offensive is harm or offensive, even if it's true, even if it's an important public health issue or matter of public importance. It allows OfCom to decide whether you are too vulnerable to listen to an opinion or a presentation of fact. It punishes broadcasters for deviating in any way from hegemonic financial or finance and hegemonic medical or health discourse and interests. So it basically limits 90% of possible news, real news and opinion from being presented to you. I mean, I'm sorry, Britain, but this is one reason your media is so boring and why legacy media in Britain is losing tens of millions of pounds per title a year. It's virtually impossible to be a journalist under these circumstances. I mean, those of you who have read my statement know that I said, with OfCom keeping watch, how will you have an Orwell anymore, or a Radcliffe Hall, or a John Milton, or a Virginia Woolf, or a Ulysses, right? It's not possible to do journalism anymore in Britain. It's not possible to talk to you about anything that veers from, anything that isn't really trivial or a matter of consensus already. And journalism isn't about consensus. It just isn't. Every new story, Watergate was controversial. We're going to get later into the lawyers saying that I'm a conspiracy theorist because I maintained or believe that powerful people can have malevolent intentions. I'm paraphrasing, toward the public, toward their constituents. And I reflected on that later, and I just thought, has she never heard of Watergate? Has she never heard of the Gulf of Tonkin? Has she never heard of the Pentagon Papers? like a government official who doesn't know the history of how sometimes people in power decide for their own agendas or for their donors' agendas or special interest agendas and not for the good of their constituents is not well enough educated or sophisticated enough to hold a responsible government office. But this is what's at play with this very technical presentation. So let's see. Lots of people are saying "kiss from your heart." We've got some flags being waved, some Union Jacks. By the way, I've been told that it's no longer legal to display a Union Jack. I'm not sure if that's true. I only have it from one credible source, but that it's racist to display a Union Jack now. I love Britain, but we're losing our traditions, says Puskins in the Fleabag. Marilyn Stanger says, love this woman. I'm a rock star. Thank you. Marilyn Stanger says, my Australia are already Chinese style rule, deafening silence by doctors. That was so sad and foreseeable. The fourth Fox sister says, thank you for not patronizing your audience. Yes, we can follow a legal document. You know, I really appreciate that feedback because I really always try to bring my audience primary source documents. And I try to not paraphrase them, you know, literally walk them through the actual language, explain it where I think it needs a little more elucidation. But I'm really glad that you said that because I think legacy media is dying partly because it does condescend to its audience. And it does have that point of view of, you know, we're smarter than everyone else and they need our paraphrase or, well, just as you heard from OfCom, we need to protect people from what it really says, you know, and I don't believe that. So it is more work to walk with me through a dense, lots of doublespeak legal document, but we have almost 3,000 people watching live. Again, I hope lots of them in the UK. I hope lots of media people in the UK, lots of judges and litigators in the UK, lots of doctors, hospital administrators. I hope the word is getting out here. It's a very important document. Let's see. Love Dr. Naomi. Thank you. Oh, Martin Baker says, I was in the courtroom for the afternoon. The OfCom lawyers got very muddy on their harm argument and kept trotting out the contradictory, we support freedom of expression line. Well, Martin Baker, thank you. And thank you for your, like, I don't know who you were supporting, but thank you for showing up because you're supporting democracy when you show up in a courtroom like that. And you're supporting transparency. You're right. They did. They were very muddy, as they would have to be, because harm is not defined in the statute. And I'm glad that you're seeing, you know, the major point that I really want everyone, especially in Britain, to go home with is this contradiction cannot be squared. You cannot have freedom of expression and this 2003 statute and OfCom claiming the brief that it does, which is, I studied the history of censorship in Britain. That was the subject of my DPhil at Oxford, and my book, Outrages, interestingly targeted. We can talk about that another time. It was about a pandemic in the 19th century that let the state crack down on rights and liberties. But this is a claim that can't be sustained. You can't have both. You can't. What OfCom is doing is broader than any 19th century censorship law. It's broader than censorship laws up until the 1960s, right? It's broader than the laws that led to the banning of you know, leaves of grass in Britain and the banning of the Well of Loneliness. Like, the 19th century censors in Britain could not have imagined the sweep of these powers. And it's just nonsense that you can have freedom of expression and this, as you now see. And the more British citizens speak up, ideally figure out again how to lobby their MPs and how to demand transparency from their system. Their legal system is very hard to penetrate. It's hard to find statutes in parliament.co.uk unless you know the name of them. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but basically it's only when citizens talk about these issues and demand a change and know about these issues and feel themselves entitled to reclaim their free speech that they're going to get their freedom of speech back. Martin Baker said the most revealing line was when the OfCom lawyers admitted that they wanted the case to serve as a warning to other broadcasters on where the line was. Thank you so much, Martin Baker. I actually was in such shock that day listening to what I listened to that I didn't even hear that. And that's very, very important. And when we eventually get the transcript, of course, we weren't allowed to record or video or audio. So it's a government provided transcript, which is also not great for journalism and transparency. But when we finally get it, I can lift out that language. But that's very important eyewitness testimony from someone who was there, that this is supposed to be a test case. And it has, look what OfCom did. They smeared my name. They smeared Mark Steyn's name. They destroyed our careers, our publishers, our audiences, our incomes in Britain. And everyone in the media watching saw that, right? So it was designed to chill speech. I've been reaching out to my contacts, 40 years writing for the British press, and trying to, cover what happened and talk about this important free speech case. It's crickets. People are, not responding. And OfCom is clearly trying to break the will of the British press. So thank you for surfacing that. I need to go in 2 more minutes. Let's see if there's anything else critical. I mean, it's all critical. Barb Hayam Bjornson says, those of us that are actually awake love Mark Steyn. He's very logical, which we don't see in our government. Very true. And Sanity Sleuth says, Mark Steyn should be reinstated at GB News on double salary. Totally agree. Lots more comments. And Denise Lewis says, oh, DJ Provocateur says, censorship is all over Britain. It's very scary. As someone who hasn't been there in 5 years and went back last week, I agree. It's such a change. It is so scary. You can't speak, you can't read, you can't protest. There's even selective policing. I saw that some protests were allowed by the City of London, others weren't. It's so terrifying that OfCom has, and Parliament, has managed in the last few years since COVID really to break free speech in Britain. And Denise Lewis, let's end here, says, I agree. Thank you for sharing those facts and the pure documents. Absolutely can understand it, right? It's like saying one can't understand the scriptures and needs someone to interpret. Beautiful, Denise Lewis. Thank you. We'll end there. I love that sentiment. It's all the same idea, right? Religions keep people from understanding scripture so that they can, be gatekeepers of the power and manipulate the message the way they want. I'm not being anti-religious here. I'm just saying that's what happens inevitably. Same thing with medicine, oh, trust the science. You're not a doctor, so we're going to tell you what to do, even if there's all this abundant evidence that it's a terrible idea. And now same thing with the law. We don't have to be lawyers. I'm not a lawyer. A lot of you aren't lawyers. We perfectly clearly understood what we read there. And thank you for bearing with me. I will read the last 10 pages probably tomorrow. Please support Mark Steyn, guys. Honestly, this litigation is so expensive. It can wipe people out. We have our own lawsuits going on here in the US, and it's tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars. Every bill can be tens of thousands of dollars. So you've got to go to his site, Mark Steyn Online, and donate to him if you are moved by this, if you think it's important. And we need your help as well. So come to dailyclout.io, donate, subscribe. It costs a chunk of change for me to get to Britain. I need your help, with that. I need your help getting this out. We need, there are costs involved with hosting and editing and social media and bringing you the facts. We're not the BBC. We don't take $55 million from the vaccine manufacturers. So we really need your donations and your memberships. And you can also support me on Outspoken, my own Substack. Become a paid subscriber or Best of Daily Clout on Outspoken. And that's it for me. I love you guys. We will prevail. I believe in you. And I'd love to hear more of your thoughts about this in the comments. Take care. Please share this, especially with friends in Britain. Bye-bye.